Hello, my generals. Welcome to What the Theory. I said generals because today I'm talking to the men in particular. So if you're not a man, what's wrong with you, first of all? And then two, stop watching. Um, I recently posted something about Andrew Tate and his father, Jordan Peterson, the lobster daddy of us all. And I received some pushback. People were like, you're all the same. And that's what they sounded like. You guys are the same. You're talking about masculinity. What do you mean? And at first I thought maybe let me write out a long response or let me have like an in-depth video to discuss this. I'm still thinking about doing that, but for one, I wanted to make a response, and particularly this response is talking to some guys, to the crop of men who have doubts, think about all these messages that they're receiving, are put off by the tone, shall we say, of radical feminists and the left, the evil left who are trying to come and destroy you, and are also looking on the right and seeing people who are saying all kinds of ridiculous things. I think any well-adjusted adult can agree that Andrew Tate is a moronic thing. It is a ridiculous, ill-adjusted, immature response to trying to be a man. He's a self-proclaimed misogynist. This is someone who's been arrested on charges of human trafficking that he proudly talks about. His defense is that he's playing a character. Now, I know many people believe that. Most well-adjusted people believe that he's a character. But then there are people that don't, and that's usually younger teenage people, the people who don't have the kind of wherewithal to see through. It's called Hustler University. He's got something called Hustlers University that people are paying for. Just think about that. You're paying money to someone as a way of making more money. I'm not going to make the connection to tithes and offerings, but that's another thing altogether. The idea that you're just going to give money to someone and that money is somehow going to be expanded for you, and yet the only person getting rich is the person selling you the hustle. Now, this hyper-masculine view to me is representation of what a lot of people call masculinity in crisis. And I have to admit, for a long time I thought masculinity was also in crisis. But what's in crisis is not really masculinity, it's patriarchy. Now, the problem is patriarchy has become this sort of boogeyman that everyone looks at and says, oh, the patriarchy, people are trying to destroy it. And maybe there's an overextension sometimes when we just refer to it as some kind of magical force. But it's not really. To simplify it, patriarchy, as I see it, is the fact that through the vast majority of history, men have occupied places of power. They have dominated power structures. Kings, they've been presidents, they've been priests, they've been the ones that have interpreted what the meaning of life is. They're the ones who've decided who can be owned and who can't, the way property rights are distributed. And women, for the vast majority of history, have been treated as property, have been treated as symbols to be won, or as ways to sort of uphold male domination. Now, that's not to say that there were no good men in this whole period in time. That is not the argument. The argument is one of systems. The one is that you could be a patriarch that has good intentions, but the logic of what you do every day reproduces the patriarchal view where you are meant to be on top, that you occupy the position of man, and that man is meant to be dominant. The interesting thing about the Andrew Tate story, and I think why it captures a lot of people, and before that it will be all kinds of hustlers and grifters and figures of the sort who tap into the discontent that men feel. If you remember the movie Fight Club, it was a very accurate portrayal of men who are struggling to try and make their way. Oh yeah, we don't talk about Fight Club. I'll just say, the club that shall not be mentioned. There was a club that shall not be mentioned where I guess people had it was a good diagnosis of the problem, in that we are sold a consumerist culture. We are told that you have to provide, you have to sacrifice yourself at the altar of capital, that you have to be strong, that your emotions can be a way in which you could be misled, that when you're negotiating you have to be dominant, that you will be an alpha male, which is funny because that alpha male stuff was based on a wrong study. Like, it's not a real thing, but everyone is always talking about being an alpha male. In fact, every time someone says they're an alpha male, what I remember, and this is something the YouTuber Sean has talked about. You know that scene in Game of Thrones where Joffrey is sort of pompously talking about how I am the king, and then Tyrion, his uncle, just like kind of insults him, and says, who cares? And the insistence that Joffrey keeps having of I am the king, the real power in the room, Tywin, man, that guy was a boss. Tywin says to him, any man who has to say I am the king is no real king. And to me, the fact that you have to keep displaying that you are an alpha male, that you have to keep declaring, shows just how hollow your feelings are. It shows just how scared you are that you might not be a man. It's such a precarious position that it holds individuals in. And so my argument today, the main message that I want to have, is about how men can start to understand what patriarchy is. And rather than take the Fight Club view, which was the club which you don't talk about, which was instead of saying that I've looked at the world and I see it's unfair, I see that there's great inequality, that there are a few people who can afford to buy toys and trinkets and treat things that are necessary, shelters. They can have multiple homes, they can have multiple cars, they can buy elections, they can do all manner of things. And that instead of looking at that and saying it's despicable, it's terrible, and it should not exist, instead we want to be those people. We want to be the Elon Musks. We want to be those dominant things, and not realizing that we're reproducing the very same conditions that have created our own suffering. That we want to be the ones at the top of the pile, instead of thinking that perhaps the pile shouldn't exist as it does. Now, it's easy when you talk about patriarchy. A lot of my friends, a lot of theorists that I've read, talk about it being advantageous to men. Now, I will argue this different point of view, which a lot of critical theorists and feminists also talk about, that it's not beneficial for men, at least not the vast majority of men. It seems to be, it upholds a certain power structure so that in some material ways, in some ways in which, a sort of surface level, you do seem to be in charge, but it makes you precarious. And the example I'll give closer to home is of my father. Now, my dad is a really good guy. He's also a very traditionally strong man. He's a Ugandan man. He's physically quite dominating. He has been successful in all the ways that you need to be successful. And the promise of it was that he would start a family, and he would have meaning, and he would be seen as a patriarch, and there were ways in which he would be rewarded for the sacrifices that he makes. Now, interestingly, as he's grown older, he's talked about how hollow all those promises can be. Why? Because rather than freeing you up, these things hold you to the opinions of other men. And that's the thing I think guys don't really understand, how much the opinion of other men hold us down. There's a joke always online about how there's no one who gets more excited at a rich man than other men. We become really, whoa, oh my God, this guy has money. Like, we start to worship power. We start to think that there's a reason villains become sort of signifiers of success. You see Patrick Bateman used as a sort of non-ironic figure to become Walter White, and him becoming Heisenberg, and we think, yeah, that's a good thing. We take the wrong message precisely because we're still living under that logic of we have to dominate in order to be made strong. That masculinity is about exerting power on others. It's about destroying others. The argument I would want to make is that the qualities that you would say are masculine, maybe let's say leadership, strength, provision, those are not things that are exclusive to being a man. Try this argument on for size. If a woman was providing for her family, if a woman was strong in negotiation, would you say that she's being masculine? Or is that a way in which she can be feminine at the same time displaying masculine features? I would say that those things don't belong exclusively to one gender or another. And that's where the gender critique comes in, that you're trying to essentialize things as a certain performative stance of gender, where gender are the roles we assign to males and females. But if you break through that, to be a good man, all you have to be is a good person. that you can use your power, your physical strength, to provide or to protect people, rather than dominating them and beating them up. You could use your courage, for instance, to be able to stand up to all traditional values, to push against things that are dominating you and treating people as second-class citizens, that say women should be in service of men, that you can push back against that and have actual courage in that instance, rather than displaying courage in some traditional format in which you're supposed to show that you don't need anybody. Now, I go back to my dad in terms of a few years ago, he cried in front of me. Now, ever since then, we've been able to have very good conversations, but the time he cried and what he cried over is there was a loss in our family that was deeply, deeply personal for us, and he had to be the strong person every single time. He was always the one who rejected support. He, sort of lived to the whole thing of, I am a guy. I'm going to make sure the funeral is going to be arranged for. I'm going to make sure that these children who've been left behind are going to be taken care of. He did all those things, but still he had no place in which he could be broken. He had no place in which he could allow himself to say that he doesn't have the answers. And in front of his son, the person for whom he most had to perform masculinity, he eventually broke down. And I could see in his eyes that he was scared about what I would think of him. And as is often the case, on the other side of vulnerability is usually acceptance, because you don't realize how the other person is also struggling with the same thing. And to men, I would say out there that you get inconsistent messages. You're told in one hand that we should treat everyone equally, that we should be egalitarian, that we should move beyond all those sort of dreams of being a dominating male or having the same existing power structures. But at the same time, we were raised by men who are of the older generation. We see the esteem in it. We want to be seen by our boys. We want to have the acclaim of women. We want to, all through history, you will find poems and art, and we are going up against centuries of examples of patriarchal valor. And I'm not saying all of that is rubbish. It actually isn't, but it's operating within a system that we're trying to transform. And so the reactionary way, you're almost left with two ways in which you can respond. One is to become an incel. Now, for people who are incels, it just means that as a man, you look at the system and say, I'm not able to meet the demands of society. I have given up. It is beyond my ability to produce. And so you take yourself out. You become an involuntary celibate person. It's interesting that men are always defined by who they can get to sleep with, but that's a discussion for another day. So you become a doomer and you sort of get your way out of society as sort of quiet rebellion. The other more dangerous one is the reactionary one, which is where I lump the likes of Jordan Peterson, the likes of Shapiro, like all of those people who genuinely can understand that there is a problem, but they misattribute the reasons. They blame women, they blame immigrants, they blame everyone else but the powerful corporations and the kind of structures that we've allowed to be in place to create the economic environments that we have. And I'm not going to mention Big Daddy Karl Marx after this, but Big Daddy Karl Marx talked about this. And what his point is that the material conditions that we live under reproduce our social engagements. They reproduce who we think is better than us, who we think is lesser of us. And those social modes of production keep reproducing the same kind of feelings that we've always seen throughout history, and that we need to change those material bases. By being a reactionary, you understand the problem, you see it, but it's tempting for you to still feel like, I need to be a man, I still need to be great, I still need to be powerful, I still need to receive all the benefits of the system. And that's where the undertaped piece comes in. He represents us still holding on to the thing that's hurting us. We're still holding on to some dead means of being. That whole cyclical thing of strong men create good times create weak men. First of all, where that was picked from in the Arabic world was almost talking about the need for bravery in terms of facing the conditions that you're living under. It was not about this idea of strength is having a sword or being violent. No, If at any point in time you're talking about a period in time when civilization hadn't reached where we are now, and so the necessary components of being a man then and the necessary components of us being a man now are quite different. No one needs you to be a marauding warrior. They need you to be present for your children. They need you to be articulate in your feelings. I'm going to say something that's a bit unkind. And I think for the longest period of time, all you had to do to be a good enough man was obey sort of the social rules. And your offering to women is that women didn't have the same rights as you. So all you had to do was provide. That's why a lot of men talk about their money. That's why we talk about having stuff. Because we still think that we're dealing with people who need our resources. That's what we bring to the table. So we put our cash on the table and say, I'm a high value man. Say, what are you bringing to the table? But when you interact with real women, when you understand that they're actual people, that they are three-dimensional, that they are not, just a hypergamous following, they actually want someone of value. That if all you're bringing to the table is money, first of all, the way economics is set up now, your money isn't worth that much. The things my dad was able to provide for in terms of having a stay-at-home wife at some point are not something that many men can provide for. You will fail to meet that standard repeatedly. And rather than changing the standard, the Bible says that the Sabbath was created for man and not man for the Sabbath. We are living the other way around. We think the standard is what should be retained and that we have to force ourselves to live under it, instead of saying that we can create a new standard that works for us. And that's where I think the left and progressivism has a harder task. We don't have easy acronyms. We don't have easy things that we can point to. We're trying to build something new. We're trying to say, what does masculinity look like in a positive sense? A lot can be said about toxic masculinity. I think sometimes it's turned into a pathogen, it's turned into a disease. I'm hesitant to do that because it's the same thing that was done with homosexuality and the LGBT community. At some point in the DSI, it was categorized as a mental health illness. Now, I think more and more it's a social standing issue. And men, the way we can, I think, break out of this is understanding that true bravery, the masculine values that we want to enjoy are not going to be given to us under patriarchy. It's not making you happy. It's not making you stronger. It's not making you more valid. If anything, it's making you economically anxious. It's always making you fearful. You have to say no homo when you say something genuine about another man. If you act in a way that could be even slightly seen as feminine, you feel scared that you're going to be judged by other people. And I'm telling you that fear is valid. I tell my friends who are female all the time about how there are some consequences that you're going to pay for being a man who's literally going your own way, a man who doesn't want to be held to these, sort of cultural standards. If you wear nail polish, I remember at some point I was dating someone and her daughter liked black nail polish. So we were playing and she put black nail polish on my hands. And when her mom came home and saw me with the black nail polish, she was like, what, are you some kind of gay guy? What's going on? And I was thinking about that scenario, like, it's me, I'm playing with your daughter, we're having a good time. If my masculinity is so fragile that me having painted nails can destroy it, then maybe it needs to be destroyed. But even her, she was working on the paradigm of there are certain things men do, and there are certain things that women are supposed to do, and we must keep that separate. Now, I think of male and female and masculine and feminine as more sort of flavorings. My dad, I would say, is a very masculine person. He's traditional in all the ways that you might think about. He likes watching football. He is a provider. But the reason I would think that I think he's gone beyond toxic masculinity is he's never tried to make me a man in his own image. He accepts me as me. He is never qualified for me to become a man in any instance. When I had long dreadlocks, when I was part of a dance crew, things for him that he feels are not stuff that guys should do, he doesn't impose his own feeling onto me. He doesn't imprison me with those views. And I would say, if you want to be free as a guy, if you want to feel like you're brave, if you want to feel like you're actually being who you are, take a chance in letting go of these patriarchal values. Once you start to push back against them, you realize that there are way more people who are suffering under this same thumb, they look like they're doing well because they have to say that they're doing well. And those who are doing well are usually dominating and becoming the cause for the oppression of other people, for other women, for other men, for minorities, for people who have different sexual orientations. Ultimately, I think for most of my male friends who say no homo, who will say, I respect, I tolerate gay people, the thing that they're quietly saying at that point is they don't really care. I don't think most of us care. There's a big debate happening on homosexuality in this country, as if it's a big issue. But everyone is afraid of being tied to it because what if they think I'm gay? And that's the point. The fact that people have been treating people who are gay and lesbian so terribly that you are so afraid to even be mentioned in the same sentence as them, to even be thought of in that manner, scares you and terrifies you to such a degree that you would want to run away from it and say, no homo. But that fear is what patriarchy is doing to you. And I think that we have to let it go. You're much braver. The things that are promised to you under patriarchy are actually robbed from you under it. I'm not saying we all have to wear skirts and become Sam Smith. No, no one is telling you to do anything of that nature. What we're saying is Sam Smith can exist. You can exist as you are. You can be treated on your own terms, and you can be free of all those requirements of the dead. You can create a new thing. You can create a world in which your son could wear pink, could do all these things that have no bearing on whether you're a good person or not. You can stop thinking of sex as a performative thing where if you don't go 7 rounds or whatever, you're not a man. It prevents a lot of poison in your life. It prevents you from having the will to change. Change is scary. Being vulnerable is scary. I know firsthand. I'm trying to become more and more vulnerable, and it's terrifying. But every time I've made that choice, I think I've become a better man, and I think you will too. So thank you for watching. If you want me to do another series on patriarchal values, I'd be happy to. Yeah, stay cool and man up.